What if money was considered a basic human right? What if UBI, Universal Basic Income, could actually work? UBI has been a pipe dream since the 16th century. In fact, the first writing on this idea was published by Thomas More in a book called Utopia in the year 1516, where More, an early economist, proposed this idea of a baseline level of living across the world where everyone had enough resources to live comfortably. American forefather Thomas Paine, in his pamphlet Agrarian Justice, published in 1797, suggested a form of UBI as a way to compensate for a loss of natural inheritance due to private land ownership. Listen, there is a crap ton to unpack when it comes to UBI. I've done it. I've read this amazing book, Utopia for Realists, by Rutger Bregman. I've also cross-referenced the top YouTube videos on UBI. And, of course, I've enlisted the help of AI, and I've asked ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini for thoughts on UBI. I've distilled it all down, and I'm going to share with you a comprehensive overview of the surprising history of UBI and how UBI is probably going to be necessary when the robots take over the world. Just kidding, but when robotics, AI, and automation completely remove the need for human manual labor, we're going to need to do something to prevent mass homelessness and a situation where the economy falls apart. UBI has been a pipe dream. It hasn't been properly instituted by any government, but there have been surprisingly successful test runs of UBI as an experiment that kind of never made it to the press. And when they did make it to the press, the results of these test runs were actually, in some cases, tampered with to suit presidential campaigns and specific beliefs. So we're going to talk about the history of UBI, the true history, and we're going to think through how it could be a really great solution to this new world where automation removes the need for human work. If you're new here, welcome. If I've seen you before, welcome back. I'm Julia McCoy. I used to be a human writer. Now I work full-time in AI, and I explore the very deepest recesses of this rabbit hole, the intersection of automation affecting everything as we know it. We are living in the most unbelievable times I believe that we will ever see. The exponential growth of AI is bigger than electricity, fire, the internet, and almost any other man-made invention. As AI experts say, ASI, artificial superintelligence, will be the last invention humanity creates, because from there on it'll be ASI carving out our economics, government, work, labor, all of it. All right, so first of all, I want to share with you some concepts that were the reason I actually changed my point of view. I used to be completely against UBI. I admit I believe the narrative where giving people free money just makes them lazy, and poor people are to blame because they've never actually done hard work, picked themselves up by their bootstraps, etc. This was a narrative I grew up with. There's some aspects of it that are true. Laziness and idleness is a problem in our world. But when I read Utopia for Realists and I dug into the studies of UBI, the reality of poverty across our world, and I looked ahead at what we, for the first time in history, will have the chance to do, which is automate, remove manual labor once and for all, which, by the way, don't we want artificial intelligence, the robots doing those things anyway? Wouldn't it be amazing to free up our lives from rote manual work and finally do something about that statistic where over 1 billion workers were studied and it was found that more than 70% have no meaning or happiness at work? We have the chance to solve that problem. But what are we going to do when robots literally take over every job, which is going to happen, by the way, and not in a matter of centuries? I believe it's just a matter of years. Well, we're going to have to redistribute the profits and the taxpayer dollars and quite literally the wealth that will come to specific companies from the complete removal of hiring humans. You don't have to pay a robot a salary. You simply have the compute and you run the machine. So this era will be incredibly profitable for major corporations and businesses. Now, I am a capitalist. I work pretty hard because I believe in building incredible results and a legacy. I'm not against that at all. In fact, even Rutger Bregman points out that capitalism blew open the doors to wealth and prosperity, but it will not carry us into this new age, with automation removing manual labor. So what are we going to do? A couple things before I go into the history of UBI and share with you a plan for how it could work in the post-labor economy. First of all, poverty itself is the problem, not people. When this light bulb moment hit me, I'll tell you, my perspective started to change. Rutger Bregman did a great job at putting together together multiple studies of poverty in all different locations around the world, and it was found that the person experiencing poverty isn't the problem. The problem is poverty itself. If we solve that, we remove the problem. In these studies, it was found that poverty has the same effect mentally and physically as no sleep or severe alcoholism. It makes people a full 13 to 14 IQ points dumber. What's for dinner? How do I feed my kids? Can I pay my mortgage? This creates a distracted, easily perturbed, unwise person that begins to make bad choices. So if we solve poverty, we solve a baseline problem that occurs among the poor because the person isn't the problem. Poverty is. So if we think like that, which is actually more in line with my beliefs, I do believe that everyone has a second chance. No one is too far gone to save or become great or find their meaning, solve the problem the person benefits. Then we can consider money as a basic human right only because automation will remove the need for manual labor. If this scenario wasn't coming in the next decade, I think that UBI would continue to fail because, simply put, we still need human workers. We still need people to work. And distributing UBI kind of takes people out of the labor market. However, as I'll share with you, among different communities of people in UBI test runs, it was found that when the problem of poverty was eradicated, people actually went and found a job they loved. So it didn't necessarily even stop people from working. That is a myth. That's not according to what actually happened when UBI was instituted in test groups across different countries. The other thought I'd really have you think about is that our current welfare system is broken. It's tied to so many rules, so many regulations, so much paperwork that it is incredibly difficult. And in some cases, it creates more stress than support for that person in need. Could UBI be a better solution than our current welfare system? Well, for one, it would completely simplify and overhaul the welfare system, because the U in UBI means universal basic income. It doesn't matter where you came from. It doesn't matter your age. It doesn't matter where you live. You get a single universal payment that removes administration hassle and bureaucracy. It would also remove the stigma that is associated with welfare, since everyone, no matter their situation, is entitled to UBI. Okay, so let's go into the history of UBI and kind of where this came from. As early as the 1500s and 1700s, leaders of countries and people that were studying economics saw this concept of universal basic income as a very good thing. Thomas Paine in 1797 took his idea of basic income from the Native Americans. There was basically no land ownership. They simply took inheritance of that land, cultivated it, and lived their life. There was no fiat money or currency for Native Americans, and yet these tribes had lived for years and years. He believed that private land ownership would create a loss of natural inheritance, and that the land was never meant to be ours to own, but simply ours to steward. However, capitalism won, and this idea of universal basic income way back then did not catch on. In the 19th century and the 20th century, we had people like Bertrand Russell, Major C.H. Douglas, that proposed versions of basic income to ensure economic security for all citizens. In the 1960s and 70s, the idea really picked up, and it almost had a successful run to being implemented in U.S. government. Here's how that went down. There were economists like Milton Friedman that suggested this idea of a negative income tax, where those earning below a certain amount would receive supplemental pay from the government. There was seriousness put towards UBI test runs across the U.S. And in the 1970s in Canada, there was a project known as Mincome, which tested the impact of a guaranteed income on poverty and work incentives. The Canada test hit almost 5,000 people. A family of 4 received upwards of 5,000 Canadian dollars per year as a basic supplemental income. No questions asked, here you go, which is the true idea of UBI. There are no strings attached. And this is when it gets really interesting. point because it frees that person up from the stigma, the hassle, the paperwork, the regulations, and it really gives them a path to the removal of poverty being the problem, not the person, freeing them up to go find meaning, to go find what they were put on earth to do. In the Canada study specifically, it was found that there was a significant reduction in hospital visits, including visits related to mental health. There was higher school attendance. More kids stayed in school because the family was less stressed. And what's interesting is teenagers specifically stayed in school longer. They didn't just jump into work. That study was done in the 1960s. In 2008, Give Directly, a UBI project in Kenya started. They tested long-term UBI, short-term UBI, and even lump sum transfers that amounted to roughly 2,900 Kenyan shillings per month. And they found some pretty wild stuff. First of all, there was an increase in entrepreneurs. More people wanted to start businesses because they finally had the means to. More people started to save and live better, and there was a higher school attendance among kids who didn't have to work. They could finally learn. In 2017, a similar project was run in Finland. Over 2,000 unemployed people received more than 500 euros per month. Mental health skyrocketed. As compared to the group without UBI, there was much higher levels of well-being. Employment didn't go down. Instead, it was found that these people went and found more stable jobs. The stress of having to find a job quickly just to pay the bills was removed, so people went and found work more in line with their passion. And in Finland, in this UBI study, more people started a business, stayed in education longer, and were open to going through training. There are so many more studies detailed in this book, Utopia for Realists, down to homeless people in Detroit that were given no strings attached, this universal basic lump sum of money. And because there were no regulations, they didn't have to jump through a bunch of hoops in order to get that money. All of the people in these test studies went and created better lives for themselves. One person picked up gardening. The activities they began to do were so healthy, and a lot of the people went and found work. Looking at poverty as the problem instead of the person is a major mindset shift, and it really opens the door to thinking about universal basic income being a good thing. In India in 2011, over 6,000 people were given guaranteed monthly payments. And the same findings with the other studies occurred. People invested more in farming equipment and livestock. They built their businesses. Their kids stayed in school longer. There was better health, better nutrition. All in all, it was a great thing. In 1969, President Nixon introduced a form of UBI through a plan he called the Family Assistance Plan, or FAP. This has influenced the direction of welfare as a whole, but here's the real story. I think most of us would agree that welfare today is broken, and it came from a completely misaligned attempt to institute UBI. Originally, the plan proposed to give every family this universal basic income amount that would have amounted to the equivalent of $10,000 per year. To satisfy conservative members of the House and Senate, Nixon decided to add in that adults must register for work programs in order to receive this guaranteed income, and he royally messed up the idea of UBI itself, because when implemented correctly, it comes with no strings attached. That's when it truly eradicates poverty and even the stigma associated with poverty. But there were two different parties, Democrats and Republicans, and to satisfy that side, Nixon had to add that in. The bill ultimately failed. It didn't pass the Senate, and instead we got all these complex verification processes for welfare, which we still have today. To understand how this went so wrong, we need to look back at England in the 1790s. There was a test run of universal basic income in an English village called Speenham Land. A rising price of grain created extreme poverty, and a social system born under Queen Elizabeth brought universal basic income to people that lived in England with the test run in Speenham Land. In the 1830s, the largest government survey to date was undertaken, and a 13,000-page report was published on the effects of UBI in Speenham Land. The findings were that it was a disaster. There was a population explosion. People had sex with the wrong people. People stopped working on and on. It made the UBI experiment look like a complete disaster. In the 60s and 70s, almost 100 years later, historians took another look at this Royal Commission report on Speenhamland, and they found that a lot of the text in this 13,000-page report was written before the study had even been collected. And out of the questionnaires distributed among all the people that received UBI in that village, only 10% were ever filled out. And the questions in the questionnaire had fixed answers. People actually couldn't choose any other answer than the ones written out for them. And it was found that the evidence in this report came mostly from the local elite and the clergy, whose general view was that the poor were wicked and lazy. So anytime that experiment is referenced, the Speenhamland test run of UBI in a small village in England, you know that that is false. It's been debunked in the 60s and 70s, but sadly, that study was why Nixon's law never passed, and the Family Assistance Plan instead jump-started the very expensive, high-stress, zero-solution welfare programs we have today. One of the chief advisors to Nixon referenced this study from the 1700s in Speenhamland, England, and they said, UBI will never work, telling him that he was introducing something absolutely horrible for America. And the president was thoroughly spooked. So ultimately, that's why he adjusted his bill. And he tied a work requirement to this idea he originally had of giving every family the assistance they needed to get on their feet. Universal basic income has been a pipe dream, and it's mostly been stopped by corrupt politicians and religious groups that believe that people are the problem, not poverty. But some of the greatest economists, thought leaders, civil rights advocates in the world have all seen the truth that UBI can be something great if we adhere to the fundamental thought behind it, which is helping people steward their life better and giving them an unbiased, no strings attached way to do it. We could go a lot deeper, talk about UBI on and on. There are additional studies that show that instituting UBI in this way could be much cheaper and much more effective than our current welfare system, which, by the way, in 2022, the federal government spent $1.19 trillion on more than 80 welfare programs. What if we just redistributed this as universal basic income? Mental and physical health would be on the rise, more people would stay in school or go back to school, a love of learning would reignite among us, and we'd even have greater economic activity. In all of those UBI studies and test runs, when people were given a guaranteed income, they redistributed it into their businesses and the economy almost immediately. Martin Luther King, in his 1967 book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community, explicitly supported the idea of a guaranteed income. And he said that it would solve the problem of systemic poverty and provide dignity to all individuals. He believed it was our moral imperative as a society and a practical solution to the problem of poverty. Sadly, shortly after introducing these ideas, he was assassinated. The two questions I have around UBI as I look ahead to how we could implement this across the world with automation reducing the need to work for a living, allowing us to get back to finding our meaning. Number one, can policymakers come together and, in short, get it together in time? I believe that they can. I think if they understand what UBI truly is, and they look at what these great economists, civil rights advocates, and the actual truth in the UBI test runs show, they will see that it is a solution to the coming problem of potential mass homelessness and job loss. As we look at a society where work and production is done by the robots. And the second question I ask as I look at UBI as a solution is, can governments across the world do this without attaching strings to it? The need for control has ruined countries and policies for decades and centuries. But we are facing a very grave and unique situation that we've never actually faced as a society, where something other than a human will be doing the work to bring us the benefits of said work. So we have a unique once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to provide guaranteed income without strings attached. It's time for policymakers and lawmakers to get it together and figure this out and launch a guaranteed income that doesn't have strings or doesn't give one government, one party in particular, all the power. This is what we have to avoid. We truly have to make this something that works for the good of humanity. What are your thoughts on universal basic income? Do you see it as a potential solution to the coming problem of total automation from robots, which, by the way, isn't a problem? It's an amazing thing, amazing phenomenon to live in the middle of and see in our lifetime, because it's going to give us the chance to go find meaning, something I believe we have lost since the Industrial Revolution coded the idea of our value tied to productivity into each one of us. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. There are so many of you that are critical thinkers thinking deeply on this with me. I'll see you in the comments. I look forward to conversing with you. And as always, I'll see you down the next rabbit hole.